Francesca was not thriving in elementary school. She was uncoordinated, struggling to read, struggling to do math, just not thriving. And her mom said, I see it in her. I know it's in there. This is a story about how they found not a cure, but a way to help Francesca with that innate potential that was in her to be expressed. We're also going to have a two-part to this where we talk about how we can share these stories more. Hi, I'm Jenna Quinton, founder of Adjust Your Media and host of What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure Stories of Innate podcast. Enjoy this story part, and then next week come back for the marketing half of how we can use tools like podcasts, AI, and even blog posts to educate and share more stories. Today on What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure Stories of Innate, we have Dr. Daniel Kimbley, and he grew up in Indiana, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and now you practice in California.
In California, yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm excited to share this because I'm going to start off a little bit because on your website and everywhere about you, you say you're a brain-based chiropractor. So first, tell us what that is, and then tell us the story.
Yeah, of course. So brain-based chiropractic, the way that we practice. So I have to preface, I think that there are a lot of people who say they work with the brain. And while that's true, chiropractic affects the brain. Where we're different is that we're actually measuring the different parts of the brain. So when I say brain-based chiropractic, what I really mean is that we're measuring frontal cortex, cerebellum, the brain stem, so that we can figure out someone's imbalances within their brain. Because we know that the brain controls every single function in the entire body. So if it's imbalanced, then that control over those functions might be less than. And so when we focus on the brain through the way that we measure it in our office, we may adjust someone in a very specific way to target maybe one side of the cerebellum or the other, or one side of the cortex or the other. And it's simply a way to really just kind of figure out, I think at a deep level, like what someone's body needs, not what I think it needs, so that they can express the potential that's already within them.
Okay, well, we're going to get into a lot of that. I love that as the introduction to what you do. So I'd love for you to share a story of how chiropractic improved someone's life.
Yeah, I think about this often, and I have so many of them that it's so hard to choose one. But I think that if I go back to, I think my second year in practice, there's a little girl that we took care of. Her name's Francesca. So how it kind of worked out is mom had been through all the practitioners. She's in elementary school, so not reading at all, really difficulty with math, and she's getting her numbers transposed. So she's having like a little bit of dyslexia, bottom of the class in reading, and then just super uncoordinated. And mom knew like there's something up, but everybody was just saying, well, she'll grow out of it. So mom calls and we have a conversation, and I just talked to her about checking, her daughter's primitive reflexes to see if there are imbalances in her brain. The way I explained it to mom is that her frontal cortex might be weaker on one side versus the other. And if it is, then that's kind of what all the other practitioners might have been missing, because she had been through the loop and they're going down the route of getting an IEP for school. And just such a sweet girl where mom is like, she's not thriving, but I know it's in her. Like, I know this is not my daughter. And so we start taking care of her, and it's so cool. This is in our documentary too. So the first thing, this is a few adjustments in. Mom sends us a video of her climbing a rock wall. And normally she's like super fearful, would never take a risk like that. And mom was like, she's beating her little brother up the rock wall, and her little brother is 2 years younger than her. And so mom's like, there's something to this because I'm noticing her coordination come back. So we start taking care of her, and she gets better at reading, and, her uncoordination kind of goes away, and we start to just see her get more secure in her body. Reading starts to get better. There's no longer a conversation of IEP in her classroom, and all of these like cool things are starting to happen. And I could share all the details of other things that happen in her body, but I think the coolest part now is that, so we still take care of her. It's been almost 7 years. Now she's a teenager. She is reading at the top of her class, no difficulties with math. She is a expert jumper on horses, which takes tons of coordination and strength and balance and all the things. She's an amazing swimmer. So she's been crushing it. Her dad's an Olympic level swimmer. So she's been like excelling in swimming in ways that I don't think mom and dad knew were like truly possible. And like that was already within her is the coolest part. So, if you know a little bit of my backstory, that when I quit teaching, that's why I quit teaching, because I understood that kids have this potential within them. And chiropractic was the way for me to unlock it. So to get to see that play out in a real way with someone in my office, it's like everything I knew to be true when I was still teaching English before I ever became a chiropractor.
Yeah, that is amazing. And there's so much, like, I think the key thing is, like you said, that she wasn't thriving, but her mom knew it was in her. And I think so often it is, a parent or a loved one. We think some people outside might be like, well, you're biased. You're their parent. You love them. And I don't think it is. I think that the love actually gives us glasses to be able to see this person more clearly and to be able to see that inside, because it's in each one of us, whatever it actually looks like. So I love each part of this. Tell us more, though, about this story that you mentioned of quitting teaching. You were teaching English. What was your journey there?
Yeah, so to make it all make sense, I'll go back just briefly to undergrad. This can be a really long story, but I promise you I'll keep it short. So going back to undergrad, I ended up in an English class. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do pre-law. Pretty quickly, I found that to be very boring. And so I changed my mind. The only thing I can think of, I was really good at helping my friends with English specifically in high school. So I was like, maybe I'll become an English teacher. So first or second semester English course, we do this research and we get to pick what we do research on. And one of the topics was the hidden curriculum. And so the hidden curriculum basically states that there's a curriculum that's being taught, like your math, science, English, history, but then there's another curriculum that's implicitly being taught, meaning that no one talks about it. The teachers may not even know that they're teaching it, but they're teaching based on some of these researchers, Claude Steele, Jean Anion. And what they're teaching is that kids are learning skills based on the socioeconomic status of their parents. And I found that fascinating because it raised the question in me, and I saw it in my own life too. Part of the reason I don't feel like I had aspirations or felt like I could become a doctor was because of the skills and the way I was taught to think when I was in high school. So I kind of felt like I was a victim of this hidden curriculum. And for me, it awakened this, if everybody has the same potential to be successful, I want to be able to help unlock that. And if we have an awareness that this thing exists, then we could help our kids. So in the classroom, I just fell in love with learning about how the brain works, how the brain learns, what parts of the brain are responsible for learning, how stress interferes with learning and weakens the prefrontal cortex and fires up the amygdala and all the nerdy brain stuff. And what I saw in my classroom was I could get really good results in like a year with some of the students, but I kept going back to the question of like, how much more quickly could we get results with kiddos if they had chiropractic care? And my crazy thought was, what if we had chiropractors as school nurses instead of school nurses? And so I finally got to the point where I felt like I wasn't teaching what I was being paid to teach. So I got offered a role to go into administration and teach what I was doing in the classroom district-wide, and I basically put in my resignation the next day.
That is really cool because my backstory is that I was homeschooled kindergarten through 12th grade. First time I ever was really in a class, I was in a university in France, which is wild. But I think that, yes, that hidden curriculum of like, what are you learning? Even the things they talk about in developing countries where children don't understand cause and effect and consequences because they haven't been taught that it is actually like a babyhood skill that as moms, we don't know we're really transferring. Like, yes, we know we're telling the baby, hot, don't touch. See, hot, don't touch. But realizing that that isn't something that all children are receiving. So yes, I think that is fascinating to think about education in this very brain-based way. Not just, oh, I want my kids to play sports, so I want them to go to this school or things.
Yeah, absolutely. What's so interesting is like all of the research points to the more stress a kid has when they are younger, the less likely they are to be successful later in life. And so like if a kid grows up and I taught in a very urban school district. So if a kid grows up in a household that has lots of stress, that's going to negatively affect their brain. And so my whole thought process was like, hey, let's do whatever we can to just strengthen that front part of the brain, which is responsible for success, because they had lots of stress growing up. And then as I learned more, I realized that chiropractic care is how we can get their bodies to process out that stress and trauma way faster. And, that's why I can take a girl not being able to read to being able to read in 3 months. Not because I'm amazing or because I'm the best doctor. It was already in her. We just give her brain the tools to be able to wake up and feel safe so that cortex can come back online.
Yeah. I think that wake up and feel safe, like that should be on a t-shirt, really. Or like, you see the memes where somebody's holding up a cardboard sign. If everyone's brains and nervous systems were clear and connected to be able to realize like, I'm awake, I'm safe.
Yep. Exactly.
Especially if children are growing up in situations where they might say, I have food, I'm not in danger. Especially if it is not an implicit danger that we think of. But like you said, stress. If it is a stressful environment, we're not going to feel safe.
Yeah, I think people forget that I have a grandma of a kid we take care of right now, and she's like, I don't understand why a 10-year-old boy, mom gets it, but grandma doesn't. And every time, she's a nurse, so every time she comes in, she's like, I don't understand how a 10-year-old boy would need chiropractic care. Like, his back doesn't hurt, but his school improvements performed. He has more energy. He's doing better in sports. And it's like the things that we think of as stress are usually like bills and someone passed away in my family. And oh my gosh, I don't know how my life is going to work out. I might be homeless tomorrow. But more of the stresses are like every time we look at blue light on a computer screen or a cell phone, that triggers a stress response in our bodies. Comparing yourself to someone else. I just recorded an episode of a podcast where I talk specifically just about how comparison is a threat to our identity. And that threat to our identity triggers the same stress response as if a bear was going to attack us if we're cavemen and women. And so I think that's important to really reframe like where stress comes from and the acknowledgement that we all have it. I think it was Harvard that did a study and they presented this, but they basically said that you and I today will have more stress in 30 days than our grandparents did in an entire lifetime.
Yes.
So it just goes to show that like we all have it. It's unavoidable. And in my opinion, chiropractic care is the way to process it out of the system.
Yes. And I will find those studies and put them in the show notes as well. But if we think about, 100 years ago, even the news that you received, you would not receive global news every morning. You would receive some local news. You'd chat with your neighbor and you'd find out what was happening. And, maybe monthly you found out what was going on in your town. And then, a big event, you'd find out there was a new president, And that we're receiving just whole chunks of information to process that probably we're not supposed to process that much information right on our phone, like you said, on blue light screens that we're opening up at 6 a.m. when we turn off the alarm and we're like, what is going on in legislation? And it's just a lot for our brains to process. And then you mentioned primitive reflexes, and I want to go back to that because I don't think we all really know what primitive reflexes are. I think we think, you hit your knee with something and your leg pops out, that's a reflex. But what are primitive reflexes?
Yeah, so like in a simple example of a primitive reflex would be when a child is born, if you swipe the bottom of their foot, you will see their toes splay and their toes should go up. And so that's called Babinski reflex. And that's just one. There are many. There's Moro, there's ATNR, there's a bunch of other ones. But primitive reflexes are cool because as the brain develops, what happens is frontal cortex gets stronger. It starts to turn those reflexes off. So we can use the primitive reflexes as a way to make sure that kiddos are in the right stage of neurological development. And so for us, they can direct exactly what we would do with someone if we're working with a child or sometimes an adult too. And so say we have a 2-year-old who has a retained Babinski reflex where their toes still come up. That might indicate that one side of the brain or the other, specifically the cortex, is having trouble turning that off because it should turn off by the time the kiddo's walking because that allows their toes to grasp the ground. And so there's just these neurodevelopmental things that seemingly insignificant give us so much insight into the proper brain development. And if we let those go longer, they usually end up manifesting as things worse later. And so I always kind of put it on a spectrum of like, usually there's stress. There can be stress during the birthing process. There's a ton of research about that. There's some really cool research now about in mice, how they say by second trimester in utero, babe is already primed for a fight or flight or rest and digest response. But a lot of times we have, a kid's born and they might be fussy, difficulty nursing, and then they have digestive issues, and then they have colic, they have temper tantrums at 2 and 3. And then they get into the 5, 6, kindergarten, first grade, and now they're a behavioral issue and they're looking at diagnosing ADHD. But like I won't say no one, but most people aren't checking those reflexes to see if the brain is properly controlling itself the way that it should. And the brain controls itself from a top-down approach. So cortex controls the limbic system, which controls the brainstem. And so if that's off, we'll see these manifestations of things. And again, it's like they're just symptoms. And the cause is always stress in the system or a weakened brain. And again, I just go back to like what I love about this podcast is the idea that the body knows how to heal itself. And those retained reflexes are a normal symptom to an abnormal amount of stress. It's not that the kid's broken. It's just neurodevelopmentally, they're off a little bit.
Right. And that's the thing, like, you're not curing dyslexia.
Exactly.
You're not curing being uncoordinated. You're not even curing primitive reflexes. Like, you're talking about the brain being ready and willing to say, oh, I don't need this anymore itself. I love to talk about primitive reflexes because it's something that I didn't know about as a young mom. And when I learned for my firstborn, it was his startle reflex. And it was like, why is this kid so jumpy? And to see that integrate to where, you can call him and he doesn't go, oh my God. And you're like, buddy, I was just telling you dinner's ready. It's okay. But to see that integrate and to see now he is 15 and, we're working on things like driving, so pray for us. But to see, like, what would it be like if he was still being so startled as he was trying to drive? Like, that is where, yes, his brain just needed to and wanted to find the off switch to say, oh, we're not a newborn. Nobody's going to drop us anymore. We're okay. So yeah, I love that that is a topic that you bring up with how the brain is developing neurologically.
What's so cool, like any of the symptoms. So if it's the startle reflex or it's a kid with digestive issues or an adult with back pain, like the thing I always remind people of is those symptoms. So like the startle reflex, if we need safety and protection, if our brain doesn't feel safe, it needs to be startled because it allows us to survive. So like I said, it's a normal response. It doesn't mean that's what should be happening. It's not an optimal response, but it's normal when there's too much stress in the system. I think of it much like a fever. Like a fever's there to heat up our body to burn off bacteria and viruses. And it's not like our creator was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I messed that thing up and I forgot to I accidentally gave them a fever and I shouldn't. No, it's there for a reason. That's why we cook chicken on the grill. So it's like all of these things that people experience where they feel like, oh, I'm broken. That's the body trying to protect itself, which is in my world, like that's a God-given response. But it doesn't mean it's normal. It's just normal when there's an abnormal amount of stress, which I think is such a key distinction for people listening, especially because like so many people are told like, you're broken, someone's going to come in and fix you. And it just breaks my heart when I hear that because we are the ultimate fixers. We have it all within us.
Yes, I love that. That's such a good message. And I'm going to put links, like I said, in the show notes. I would like to jump into part 2. How do we share more of our stories? So if you're just joining us on What Chiropractic Doesn't Cure Stories of an Ape podcast, we're with Dr. Daniel Kimbley, and we are talking about how we can share more of these stories about how we have everything that we need inside of us. We're not broken, and how we can help to communicate that with people. I know you mentioned a podcast. What are some ways that you love to share these stories and educate people?
Yeah, I love sharing. I mean, number one, I love speaking in any way I can. So, and just encouraging people like that, even going back to my teaching, it's just part of who I am is like, I want people to see what is within them, even if they can't see it for themselves. So the podcast has been the biggest thing for me. I have 2 different ones, and one of them, I love to talk about the nerdy science. Others just straight up chiropractic, but I love just sharing the case studies. I think what's most important, especially, if there's someone listening who's like not a practitioner, if it's a mom, is like so many people have stories that I don't think they share, even with their friends or family. And I think a lot of times, like I'll get this a lot where someone in my office will ask me, how do I explain to somebody else what you do? And I'm like, you don't need to explain the science of what I do. Just tell them your story. And if you knew how many times I've had moms or kids or whole families come in and they're like, I heard this person and they told their story at the baseball game and they were just talking about the result they got with being under care. Like those stories have such a ripple effect through families. Like even if someone doesn't start chiropractic, I'll give you an example. I have a mom who she's like in her mid 30s, right? So she came in a walker, way too young to be in a walker with low back pain. So she also was having panic attacks daily, a bunch of other stuff that she didn't even tell me about. And like her family's not under care, it's just her, but how she gets to show up for her kids because one of our clients in the office told her the story of her results that she got. So I think like, I know some people have this misconception about chiropractic, but just saying like, listen, you don't need to know the science of it. Just listen to what happened to me or listen to what happened to my kid. The power of the story is so big.
Yes, I agree. It's so true that there's so many different ways to do it. Just like, you as an educator, thinking through people who like things to be told to them out loud, visual learners, kinetic learners. Like, there's so many different ways that we can share stories, whether it is, well, and I will say for the doctor to share it in a lot of those different ways, to connect with people who are learning in those different ways. Like, for example, I want a blog post. I want black words on a white page. I want H2 headers. I want to skim through that baby, and then I want the links at the bottom so I can dig in and do my research myself. I don't want to watch a 10-minute video. No time. So, when we're telling the stories, thinking about telling them in different medias so that we can do it, because you're going to have, my husband is a podcast listener. He's a firefighter. He just wants to get on a treadmill for like an hour and listen to a podcast. I can't do that. I can't move and think. So putting a story out, taking just even that one story and telling it in multiple different ways, using multiple different tools, do the video, take the transcript and make a blog post, put it onto social media, and then find the local mom's blog or the local mom's podcast and say, I would love to be a guest. Can I come tell this story? All of those different ways. I love it.
You bring up such a good point because I like to do videos, but I will take my transcripts and I'll just plug them into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you make carousel reel out of this thing that I talked about? And so I think, sometimes people feel overwhelmed. They're like, I don't know how to create all that. But AI is such a cool piece of technology to assist us in those things that it can just make life so much easier and so much smoother. And there may still be some editing so it sounds true to yourself and all that. But you're so right, is yeah, record the video, get the transcript. One of the things I love to do is I'll walk and I'll talk into an app that I have and it can upload straight into ChatGPT, and I'll say, hey, take away the key points. Could we turn this into this piece of educational content? And it's usually just me telling stories about this thing that happened in the office that day. And so it really can be so simple. I know you're a thinker, so you like to sit and read and probably highlight and underline and some of that stuff. But there's just so many tools out there with AI that make life tremendously more simple.
Yes, and with that, I'll say in my membership, because I was seeing that need, we launched a custom GPT. So it is already pre-written for you to be principled, to have your hashtags, to prompt you where you can be prompted. And so even just that, and being able to take a tool like that is going to keep you on the straight and narrow, where you can just quickly say a story about a constipated kid. I had this story about a constipated kid. They were 8 years old. He's been under care for 3 months and is no longer on Miralax. You put that into, especially a trained GPT like mine, and it's going to come up with something good. And then it's going to say, do you want to do an email newsletter? Do you want to do a blog post? Do you want to do a video? And I think that if we all start off with what makes us most excited to tell that story, if we start off with where is my energy best placed, then we have tools and people and systems to then put it out there. And that is so helpful. So tell us what your 2 podcasts are called.
Yeah, so one that I no longer record for, so I did it's over 300 episodes. So it's called the Nexus Podcast. So Nexus is my practice. And then the other is called the Profitable Chiro Network. And so that one's a little more geared towards practitioners who want to know more about the brain and the way that we talk about the brain. And there are, I just go down rabbit holes of the neurology and how the brain works. Like I told you, I talked about just specifically how comparison can wreck our physiology. So it's meant to educate people who want the deep dive into the neurology, but also just help practitioners think a little bit differently about their practices and how they help people, because it's so much more than just neck pain, back pain. It can be very challenging to have those conversations with patients. So how do we bridge that gap between the science and then having a real conversation with someone?
Yes. So I think that a podcast is an interesting marketing tool. I would love for you to tell a little bit, how hard was it for you to start up these podcasts? If somebody was maybe I would like to do a local podcast for my practice members, for my community. What was that process like? How hard was it?
Yeah, I didn't start this simple, but you can hit record in a voice memo and record it. Depending on what platform you use, it will enhance the audio for you. It takes no tools and resources. It just takes your voice and sharing what you're passionate about sharing. So it can be so simple. Video can get a little bit more, I'm picky and I'm OCD about like backgrounds and lighting and all this stuff. So that can get a little bit more tricky. But I think what's so special is like, if you wanted to go the route of podcast, I think most people don't feel like, well, I don't have anything to say. But I'm like, just talk about what you're passionate about and it will attract the people who need to be attracted. And on the marketing side, like my podcast has been so cool because you probably get this about me that I like to talk about the neurology, but I can bore people. So I just say, yeah, we work on the brain. We don't really do like popping, cracking. So if you're interested, just go check out my podcast. And then it was also a way to bring clients into our practice and they could kind of get to know me in the way I thought about the body and decide if they're a good fit before they ever stepped into our practice, which is really nice as well. So if you're on the fence, do it. You have to.
Well, so this is really the heart of content marketing is say it once and let people hear it 1,000 times. And I've said it when I speak somewhere. Sometimes I'll start off by saying, do you want me to give my talk to each one of you individually? Or do you want me to stand on a platform and say it to all of you at once? And that whether you're a writer and you love to write, whether you're a talker and you want to do a podcast, the goal is to say it once and have it be heard 1,000 times. And then the search engine optimization of that, of your name and chiropractic, your town, is popping up more frequently in the algorithm in Google. So the searchability of it is great, but I love that. Being able to say, we have a podcast episode on that. We have a blog post on that. That's something that I tell people a lot, like if they have a front desk saying, make sure that your front desk is up to date on the content that you're creating so that they can say, when you send a patient to the front desk and they say, doctor was talking about ear infections. He said you would send me a link. Yeah, then they're ready and they know we have these resources. We have this video, this podcast, this blog post, this article, whatever content you've created, everybody on your team knows and can direct people to that. Because I have a bunch of sisters, for example, none of whom listen to me. But if I sent them a link and said, Dr. Daniel did this podcast and I think it would be really helpful, they might listen to you.
It's so true. You know, like for practitioners specifically, one of the things that we do is after someone does an exam with us, we will send them 2 episodes in email. And my front desk my whole staff actually is trained to do this, but they'll go into our podcast and they'll look at, okay, this is what they were presenting with. This is kind of what their goals were. And we'll curate in their follow-up email, like, thanks for coming in. We'll just drop 2 in to just educate them more about how their body can heal itself. And all it does is just make compliance better, you know? So it's like, it's stuff that's already there. It's just, like you said, I think you said it so beautifully, is actually using it. And sometimes people will listen in certain formats versus not in others. So like if your mom wouldn't listen to your story, maybe she would listen to me talk about why this person with diabetes is no longer pre-diabetic, you know, or whatever it is. So
Yes. And I will say my sister Faith does listen to me because she produces this podcast.
Oh, cool.
So Faith is awesome. But it is also the thing of giving people something that then they can share on their own social medias and things. Like I might be hesitant to be like, oh, I don't want to bring up this controversial thing. Or I don't want to outright tell my friend that her kid probably has retained primitive reflexes and needs neurological help. But maybe I could gently share a link to my own social media and just tell people this was really interesting or this was life-changing to me. So it gives people an easy way to refer them to you, because then also your content is going to have all of the links and information back to you so that people can window shop and then go ahead and make a call. I will note that on your new patient information, people might say, oh, this is the person that referred to me, but know that it might have been your content as well that nurtured them along.
Yep, absolutely. So good.
Wonderful. Well, I know we could keep talking forever and ever, but I'm going to put all of the links in the show notes so that people can listen to your podcast and reach out to you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun.